Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to LP's Open Mic Night. And on this edition of the Open Mic Night, we're talking the Cowboys' dramatic late finish against the Cincinnati Bengals. So before I get into it, I want to say if you guys like the video, like the style of content, hit that like button, hit that sub button, share it out there with Cowboys Nation. Also, I'm going to be pulling from my news and notes that I have written down during the game, and also some information that I put in my article over at Blogging the Boys, where I talked about the star of the game and the 5 stars of the game, the supporting cast, if you will. So if you want to check that out, head on over to Blogging the Boys and check out a lot of their content as well, including my favorite, Trolling the Nation. So head on over, check me out, check them out. You know how it is. Now, also, like I said, I'll be pulling from my news and notes on my thoughts and takes while I was watching the game as well. So bear that in mind. But like I always do on the channel, I'm going to talk about the Cowboys defense versus the opposition's offense, and I'll switch sides. So getting right into it, the one thing I want to talk about is how the Bengals running game was kept at bay by the Cowboys run defense. So in the game leading up to it, I talked about just how they had to stop Joe Mixon, how I was worried about letting Joe Mixon kind of get going in the game, because what it could do was open up the Bengals play action game, leaving their receivers in man coverage deep down the field. It never happened. They were able to keep the Bengals honest, yet stop Joe Mixon. So that was a big win for them in that regard. But what I didn't like was the penalties. And I'll talk about it quite a bit, but the penalties are what really bothered me with them, is that they gave the Bengals extra life. As a matter of fact, the Bengals scored 6 points on drives that were extended by penalty. And that's what the Cowboys cannot do. They cannot make these little mistakes. Thinking about the penalty committed by Anthony Barr, it just felt like it was a bad penalty at the worst possible time, which resulted in 3 points for the Bengals. And this defense is good. It's not good. It's an elite defense, in my opinion. But what they're going to have to realize is that not just the defense, but the team as a whole have to understand they're not good enough to get by making these mistakes and without making games very uncomfortable on themselves. And as far as uncomfortable, talk about Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons to me is, without question, your top tier front runner for DPOY, Defensive Player of the Year. Micah Parsons is that guy. And I was just on a podcast with Justin Varez and Brandon Laurie, the Writer's Block podcast, also on Blogging the Boys. And we talked about Micah Parsons. And Micah Parsons, as I said over there, was he has gravity. So those that watch the NBA, those that watch your Steph Currys, your Luka Doncic's, they talk about gravity, which means a player is so great, so terrific, that he draws in the opposition's attention, that he creates for others. And Micah Parsons is your Steph Curry of the NFL. Just the gravity that he has and how he just brings the offense in to create space for his guys. And that's really what you saw there. But for Micah Parsons, he was just working over guys like La'el Collins, Jonah Williams. He got some of that too. And like I said, he wasn't alone. He got some help. And it was good to see guys like Dante Fowler get pressure with a sack and a forced fumble. And then you saw Dorrance Armstrong. And for me, Dorrance Armstrong, I think, is a player who's ascending, who's getting better and better. He's only 24 years old. He's got a new contract. And I know that with Dorrance Armstrong, he's been looked down upon for not being Randy Gregory, but he's starting to produce. So he's got 2 sacks in the game yesterday. And then for me, I think he's going to get very hot, very fast. So aside from Micah Parsons, aside from all the playmakers on defense, I think the name to watch in the future, in the next coming weeks, is going to be Dorrance Armstrong. And also somebody to spotlight is Donovan Wilson. Donovan Wilson was all over the field on Sunday. He was making hits, as he's done before, but he was making hits and really letting people know that he was out there and he wasn't playing around. So you saw him chasing Joe Burrow out of the pocket. And a good thing for him as well is he got attention on a national scale. So those that are on Twitter also saw the breakdown about him by Brian Baldinger, Baldy's breakdowns, if you will, talking about how he played, how he understands the angles and how to get to the ball carrier. And he deserved all the praise that he got for his performance yesterday. So a major shout to Donovan Wilson. And with Donovan Wilson, it's him taking on the role without Jaron Kearse and being that big nickel linebacker. And it was a big test for him. And I think he aced that exam. He was great yesterday. So a big shout to him, and also a big shout to the secondary as a whole. Like I said before, stopping the Bengals receivers from getting going and burning them, which I thought they could have. So a big spotlight and shout out to the Cowboys' entire secondary. And speaking of the secondary, we had to talk about Trayvon Diggs. Trayvon Diggs I know from the average fan or I guess what the casual fan, if you will, gets a lot of flack, and he gets a lot of flack for the little things that he doesn't do all the time, and mainly within the Cowboys community has been his tackling. He was big yesterday with his tackling, and I also want to point out he was very good in coverage. They did a great job of limiting Jamar Chase and never letting him get off. And Trayvon Diggs is a big reason for that with his coverage. And again, he may not get the same amount of picks as he got last year. 11 is a big number to reach, but he was around the ball a lot of times. Go back and watch the game. See how many times he was closing in on a pass, only getting his hands on it, maybe close to interceptions. He was very good yesterday in coverage. And also, like I said, his tackling was so huge. You want to talk about getting the ball back to have a chance to win the game. The tackle that he made on second down on Joe Mixon, then have that tackle in the flat on third down to get in the ball. You got to give a lot of credit to Trayvon Diggs for his efforts yesterday, for sure. A big spot in the game. And also, as a whole, a big shout to the entire Cowboys defense and Dan Quinn, how he had his guys ready to play against an opponent that has weapons to make you feel uncomfortable. So big shout to their defense on that side. And then also, just to kind of shift gears and talk about the Cowboys offense versus the Bengals defense. Just disclaimer and warning right here. I'm going to talk about the offense for a minute. So a lot of things to talk about. And the reason for it is that it's, for me, a bit of a mixed bag. There's give and take on their performance. There's some good and some bad. And I'll start with Cooper Rush. And with Cooper Rush, give him the credit he deserves for how he played. He was very confident in the pocket. He kept his eyes downfield. He took some big shots too. And he just kept playing. And he kept playing, staying his focus. But for as good as he played, there are limitations to him. And the Cowboys offense, and it may not entirely be his fault, but the Cowboys offense went ghost for most of the second half. And Cooper Rush does not have the arm talent to have to lead that front or lead that charge. And when I say arm talent, I do mean the arm strength. There were a lot of times you watch the game and he's trying to get the ball outside the numbers. And he doesn't have the arm strength to get it there. So a lot of his throws outside the numbers. Even these were like checkdowns we're talking about. We saw a throw, I think, to Tony Pollard, and I think one to CeeDee Lamb in the flat, where he doesn't have the arm to quite get it there. And so that was a close call for a pick going the other way. And I think twice that might have been Mike Hilton on the Bengals. So that's part of the limitations that I speak of, just the natural arm talent. And I got to discuss this because I know it's going to come up. It's probably already came up. But social media, Twitter, and I only know about Twitter. I can't speak for the other websites. But I know that the Dak hate hive is out, and then they're alive and well. And they're already getting carried away about Cooper Rush and what this means for Dak Prescott. I'll tell you this, if you're a Cowboys fan, you're probably watching this podcast, you know very well that it's a waste of time. People that see that as Dak Prescott being somehow below Cooper Rush, don't bother to argue with them. Just mute and move on and just focus on the more important things. And the more important things with Dak Prescott is that he may be back earlier than expected. It seems like he's recovering well. There's no swelling in his hand after surgery, and they're very optimistic about him. So hopefully that comes to fruition. If he can play, he'll play very soon. But if not, and he takes some time, we have to see Cooper Rush just kind of relax a little bit, cut down on the would-be mistakes that could arise. And again, despite it all, he played a very, very good game and much more than we expected. And of course, give him his flowers. He's now 2-0, and he's come up big twice as the underdog last year in Minnesota, which I'm sure gave him a lot of confidence going into yesterday. And of course, a comeback win, a game-winning drive win, just like Minnesota, against the Bengals. But I still want to talk about this, though, and that's Kellen Moore. And Kellen Moore is the main reason why I'm back and forth on this performance by the offense. So on one side, you want to give Kellen Moore the kudos for sticking to the run game, because after the game last week versus Tampa, he abandoned the run, and they had questions about that, about him giving up on the run too soon. But then on the other side, you talk about how the offense went stagnant and went stale for almost an entire half. And the reason why I can be a little bit concerned about that or bullish on Kellen Moore is that I feel like if you wanted to commit to the run, that's totally fine. But I feel like they had to be explosive with that choice. And they could have been conservative yet trying to be more explosive. And that means, of course, why didn't you incorporate Tony Pollard more in the jet sweep motions, or maybe more with Pollard in the backfield? I just felt like they got away from Pollard after he had that big catch, if you will, because it was a catch, but the long run that he had that was inside the 1 yard line. I felt like they could have gone back to him more and given him more chances to be explosive, yet still being conservative. They never got back to it. So that's where I look at Kellen Moore like, okay, you made some nice calls, but you could have been a little bit better in that area. And maybe it's a nitpick, and maybe it's just, being concerned about a game that was very, very close at the end. However, I feel like they could have gotten Pollard involved more, hence give themselves a more chances, I should say, to be explosive towards the end of the game. Now, also the other thing that I want to discuss is just the way that the game was coached, though. Because I know I said all that about Kellen Moore, but I also want to talk about how they coached the game as well. So whoever's call it was to go for it on 4th and 2 early in the game on their side of the field, whether that's Kellen Moore or the call from Mike McCarthy, who said he'd be more involved in the offensive play calling. Whoever made that call, though, that was huge. That was huge. The team had to find their way early, and I felt like the team had to catch the momentum and have something to spark and motivate them throughout the entire process. I did say in my preview that I felt like in this game, the coaches would coach their asses off. With the pressure of not falling to 0-2, the coaches would coach their asses off. And I think that they did. I think they did. As far as how they began the game, how they would try to stay the course, I do think they did the best that they could given their circumstances all the same. So, again, a huge thing. And then, of course, we have to mention Noah Brown. Noah Brown came up big in the entire game. And Noah Brown was just so vital to that win. And I think CeeDee Lamb had talked about it. CeeDee Lamb was so just effusive in his praise for Noah Brown, just how happy he was for Noah Brown in the game that he had. And a lot of Cowboys fans who have supported Noah Brown for a very long time probably feel the exact same way. They're happy for Noah Brown. Noah Brown has been around the team since 2016, I believe, as a 7th round pick. And even back then, people thought that he was a steal for his gifts and his talents. And maybe they were right. I mean, he was clutch. He held on to a big throw on 4th and 2. He also made a huge catch in the 4th quarter on the tip drill for a ball that was tipped in the air on the game-winning drive. He had a touchdown catch. He just made the biggest plays. And oh, by the way, on the podcast with Justin Navarez and Brandon Lauria at the Writer's Block on BTB, I was also told he also played in the game as your lead receiver and was the personal protector for the punter. So imagine that. He's actually protecting the punter on special teams, yet being your number 1 receiver of the day. So a lot that he did in that game. So he deserves a lot of kudos for that. And then, of course, you have to talk about CeeDee Lamb. And CeeDee Lamb got a lot of flack all week, and he deserved it, to be honest. He deserved it. CeeDee Lamb, and I said this before, to whom much is given, much is expected. And CeeDee Lamb came out with a lot of heat, but guess what? He did what he had to do. He did exactly what he had to do. He didn't ball out. It wasn't a huge game of like 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, but he did what he had to do, and he had to eliminate the mental mistakes, and he did that. No penalties, no drops. He went in there and just handled business. And that's what the Cowboy fans have been asking for. And really, if you kind of understand Jerry Jones's comments, as harsh as they were, it's just you wanted to see him go out there and handle business. And he did just that. So very, 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 very much needed and good game by CeeDee Lamb. And of course, we got to talk about the O-line. The O-line played a good game. I mean, talk about Terrence Steele. Terrence Steele had a hard time last week with penalties. He bounced back. He was pushing guys out of the way in the running game. And I talked about earlier, Lyle Collins. Terrence Steele outplayed Lyle Collins in a major way. Being able to do that, to face the guy that you replaced, him come back to his old job and see that, and see how Terrence Steele was handling himself in the running game, is critical. It's critical. I know I made a joke about this on Twitter, but Lyle Collins is that situation where if your job fired you, they can prove that they were right for firing you. You know what I mean? Like if your job lets you go and they brought you back for one day to see you get worked over so they can say, yeah, we were right for firing you. That was Lyle Collins. And it's funny because juxtaposed to that, you saw how well Terrence Steele played in the running game, getting to the second level, moving guys out of the way, working on these double team blocks. He just had a great game yesterday. And of course, Tyler Smith went again with another good performance at left tackle. And I know I was kind of concerned about Tyler Smith playing up against Trey Hendrickson, and he blanked him. He blanked him. He was solid in his technique. He didn't get beat. He just went about his business. And he's been everything and more that the Cowboys fans didn't think he would be. He has surpassed expectations so far in only 2 games outside of position that he was trained to do. It's crazy. It's crazy for Tyler Smith. It's a big game. And as much praise as that shower on the offensive line, I got to talk about one player in particular. And it's not to single him out or to pick on him, but it's just to make a bigger overarching point. And that's Dalton Schultz. And Dalton Schultz, his mistake with the fumble is exactly what I'm talking about when I say this team has to understand that they're not good enough to overcome these situations. They're not good enough to overcome the slim margin for error. And it's not to pick on Dalton Schultz, who I think has become kind of a punching bag amongst the fan base. It's just to make the example, and not to make the example of him, but the situation. Like I said, the team has to understand that their margin of error is very slim. It's slim without Dak Prescott. It's slim without a consistent receiving threat outside of CeeDee Lamb, or even if CeeDee Lamb can be consistent himself, their margin of error is very slim. And even with Kellen Moore kind of getting lost in his play calling, the margin of error is very slim. So you watch that game with Dalton Schultz, and when he fumbled in that game, with the team up 7, driving down the length of the field, and it all felt like, for all intents and purposes, if they score on that drive, a field goal, a touchdown, the game is probably over with this defense, with that they're playing so confidently. And as soon as he fumbled, then all of a sudden the Bengals, who, again, the Bengals are a team that has potent playmakers, felt confidence enough to go back there, drive the length of the field, and tie the game afterwards. So things like that was where the team has to understand that you must play mistake-free football and play your best, whether it's penalties, whether it's fumbles. They just have to be better. And I think the example of Dalton Schultz allows that message to kind of take shape and for us to understand. And also hopefully the team understands they have to play better football when the time comes for it. And then just talking about Dalton Schultz as well, some news today that he's actually hurt. About that, it looks like he may miss the game versus the Giants next Monday. And I'll be looking at the Giants game later on this week, talking about the Giants game. But it seems like he's not there. That also means his counterparts, the 2 rookies, Peyton Hendershot and Jake Ferguson, must step up. But I'll talk about that more later this week on the preview for the Cowboys versus the Giants. But other than that, I want to say this game. Oh, and I forgot one thing as well. I didn't talk about special teams. Big shout to Turpin, who had a big play on the punt return. Also, I want to talk about Brian Anger, who was good in that game. We also talked about him as well on the Writer's Block podcast, and he was actually very good in the game that I wasn't even aware of. How him just being himself, pinning this team back, the Bengals, on that key drive before they got the stop and made the game-winning kick. So also Brian Anger played well, and the hero of the day, Brett Maher. And Brett Maher has been mistreated, let's say, by Cowboys Nation from his time here last time. But he's been so far perfect, and I mean that, literally perfect. He's made his extra point attempts. He's made both of his kicks, which I think were both beyond 50 yards, and 8 touchbacks in 2 games. So he's been a very sound contributor, a perfect contributor with what he's done in the first 2 weeks. So a big shout to him as well. And when you talk about that game versus the Bengals, you kind of summarize it and put a bow on it. Just think about, they did everything from a complimentary standpoint to win that game. It was uncomfortable at times. It was kind of on the edge of your seat. For me, literally on the edge of my seat. But they played complimentary, sound football in all 3 phases to win that game. And without Dak Prescott, without your best weapons, without your best players, again, no Dak, no Michael Gallup, to win that game in all 3 phases in a complimentary style is exactly what you want. That's the toughness, the grit that this team has to exhibit now and when they get Dak Prescott back, along with Michael Gallup. So again, it's a very encouraging win, a very believing win to have that win as things are shaking out right now in the NFC East. But a big win for the Cowboys. And those are my takes and thoughts here on the Open Mic Night. And before I get out of here, once again, guys, hit that like button, hit that sub button, share it out there with Cowboys Nation. And you can also check me out once more over at BTB at Blogging the Boys. And of course, that's it, man. Thanks for watching. Thanks for rocking with me. And as always, Cowboys up. Peace.